Record. Love that. Okay, welcome to PFLAG Olympia's annual candidates forum, third year on Zoom. We are a organization that prides itself on being there for LGBT people and their family and friends. So we'll get started with our two other board members, that are here today, Dana and Diane. So today's questions will be from PFLAG members and the board. So we'll just, I'm Rob. Totally forgot about myself. I am been running this forum for many years now. And I took it over from Alec Clayton. And so we'll start off with, we'll go around the room for the candidates. You'll tell us your name, the position you're running for, and then tell us about yourself and why you were running, and then why you are the best candidate for that position. And we will start off with Mr. Sanders. With 3 minutes. Sorry, everyone. You get 3 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Rob. So my name is Derek Sanders. I'm running for the position of Thurston County Sheriff this year. I'll kind of start off with my background a little bit. I was born in California. I started experiencing domestic violence at the age of 5. We were homeless. My mom and my sister were homeless at the age of 8 and living in DV shelters, living in a van that was donated by a church. Couldn't leave the state of Colorado because we had a lot of court issues going on. And once we were able to free ourselves of that, we moved up to Washington here. I've lived in Thurston County now for 19 years. This is where I call home. And so ended up getting hired on with Lacey Police Department at the age of 20 years old as a community service officer. And then at 22 years old, I got hired on with Thurston County Sheriff's Office, where I've served as a deputy sheriff ever since. In my time with the Sheriff's Office, I've prided myself on good police work that balances compassion and enforcement, because too far either direction lends you renderless as far as getting good law enforcement done. And so that's kind of what I bring to the table with my platform in law enforcement, is a good blend of balance between compassion and enforcement. And so my top priorities are first going to be public safety. Obviously, we're dealing with a crime wave, and there's a lot of things that we can be doing as the Sheriff's Office that we're not currently doing, that I plan to employ. So one of the big things that we're not capitalizing is technology. We have a funded but unfilled crime analyst position, and that position can work wonders for an agency that's lost 12 deputies this year. And so when you talk about an agency that's understaffed and is working just absurd amounts of overtime to try and keep this place afloat, people start seeing that the service isn't there, right? The deputies are burned out, they're tired, and a lot of these calls and stuff are going unserved. And so the crime analyst position really gives us the ability to more efficiently use the deputies that we do have. The second thing is going to be the transparency side of things. So I'm at a point where, I can't get a straight answer as to why we let deputies who commit crimes leave without holding them accountable. There's no criminal investigation that started. Another agency, when a deputy commits a crime, another agency should immediately be taking over a criminal investigation and sending that stuff to the prosecutor's office for review. And that's not occurring. And that's the kind of stuff that validates all the mistrust that people have in their police departments. And then the third thing is kind of to caveat onto the first one, which is the morale of this department is horrific right now. There doesn't seem to be any direction. And it's a vicious cycle that continues to eat itself as more and more deputies continue to leave this department. And so I'm looking to turn all that stuff around and get us back to a point where we can do good law enforcement, we can hold ourselves accountable, and rebuild the trust with our community.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. And we will go to Mr. Snaza.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you all for having me here. I really appreciate the time. I started in law enforcement about 30 years ago. Prior to that, I was a U.S. Navy and Special Operations Group. And getting into law enforcement, I got into it because I wanted to be of service. I wanted to be a servant. I couldn't tell you why I want to be that guy, but it ended up that I am that guy. And the goals that I have worked for as a deputy sheriff, involved being a training officer, being in narcotics, being a SWAT team leader, being a methamphetamine lab team commander, being search and rescue, being involved in the sheriff's office so that I had a better opportunity of understanding what law enforcement is about and knowing what we do every day to serve the citizens of Thurston County and how hard it is. Thurston County has seen significant changes both in our community and in the legislative laws in the last 3 years, where we had racial inequities and protests going on that affected our entire community, whether it was the new laws that impacted how we get to serve our community and what we can and can't do to serve our citizens who need it the most. And then on top of all that, how COVID hit us. And what I want to say is that working through all of that, I could not have done it by myself. I did it with all the men and women of Thurston County Sheriff's Office. And are we transparent? Absolutely. Mr. Sanders, when he talks about what transparency is when people do something wrong, well, he neglects to say we have bargaining units. I actually have 4 bargaining units that I'm responsible for. And I am very transparent. And when we have any case that comes, that we do present it to the prosecutor's office for review. Now we'll talk about individuals who leave. This has been the great resignation in the United States. And the best thing I can do for everybody is provide the best agency where we can come to work and feel that we are doing our job to serve our community. And I believe we are doing that. And one of the best things that we're doing for innovation and transparency is having in-car cameras and body cameras. That isn't just like it happened overnight. That took us 4 years to get going. Doing that, working with our new records management system that will do about 98% analysts will do. Those are the things that we're working on. Innovation, technology. It does take time, but it is something that we're always trying to strive for, is be innovative and creative. And it's my job to work for every citizen in Thurston County to make this a better place. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Snaza. And then we'll go to Mr. Drew.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you for holding this forum and inviting me. So I'm the Thurston County Assessor. I was first elected in 2010. Prior to that, I had 30 years experience as a property insurance adjuster, independent insurance adjuster, 18 years running my own business. So I brought a wealth of experience on relevant to the office, to the job, but I joined an office that was really fractured and broken and had a bad rapport with the taxpayers and backlogs and appeals and wasn't meeting any deadlines and was top heavy management. So we reorganized, eliminated half of the management, restored all the part-time positions to full-time. And within 6 months, we'd eliminated the backlogs and we've remained current since, with the exception of when we send out reval notices, which were current until COVID. That can't occur until our appraisal process is complete. And like John mentioned, managing through COVID has been extremely complex. The in-office environment, the quarantines, remote versus in-office, all of the challenges of my folks working in the field. And I and my management team have led us through that and held on to a very high standard of customer service and a very high level of rapport with the taxpayers, even as values are going up precipitously. Along the way, I've become the legislative chair for the Assessor Association, and I've twice worked to improve the senior exemption program. And we're currently in a study, implementing a study bill to look at aerial imagery statewide so that it can be available to all sectors of government at lesser cost. So why am I running? My work is not done. When that study comes back, then we're going to work to pass that bill to get that imagery to all the counties and cities that don't have it. Then I would say I thought I had a minute left. What happened? So I have roughly a minute left. I was going to shift and just say my work in the community. Some years ago, Lynn Grotsky reached out to me and asked that I become involved as a board member, later as president, served as treasurer for half a year of Pizza Klatch. Because of my background in working on the boards and as an officer on several nonprofit organizations, and my work in that arena, When my wife was a senator, I brought an exhibit to the Capitol during Hands Off Washington that helped to educate away from the stereotypes that were prevalent at that time. So I'm proud of the work that I did with Pizza Klatch and with the other nonprofits. I currently also serve as a trustee at SPSCC Community College, and I went to that role specifically because of my interest in those less fortunate and the communities within our community, our greater community, that have more challenges in gaining education and getting a leg up is the LGBTQ plus community, and it's a central focus for me there. So time's up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Drew. And we'll go to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Jessica Bateman, and I serve as state representative to the 22nd District. I have lived in Washington my whole life, and I've called Olympia home since 2007. I grew up in a single parent household raised by my mom, who also experienced a substance use disorder and began her public sector career working as a janitor. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college with a degree, and I worked my way through school to get my associate's degree from Green River Community College, and then went on to transfer to Evergreen to earn my master's degree. I began my work in politics working as an organizer for a statewide initiative, I-1163, and then I went on to work as a legislative aide to former state representative Chris Reykdal. I served on the Olympia Planning Commission and then was elected to the Olympia City Council in 2015, and this is my first term in office in the legislature. As an organizer and coalition builder, I've worked to create affordable housing, assist struggling families, and empower at-risk youth. As a council member, I sponsored the Olympia Sanctuary City Resolution to ensure that all residents in Olympia are welcome and safe. And I led the campaign to pass the Home Fund, the first municipally funded, permanent, supportive, low barrier housing in South Puget Sound. And in the legislature, I have championed creating more housing for working families and low-income people. And I currently work as a policy advisor for Washington's community health centers during the day, which are the largest network of providers for Medicaid patients in Washington state. I'm committed to creating an equitable, healthy, and prosperous future for all Washingtonians, and I'm committed to ensuring that no one is left out or left behind. It's an honor to serve as your state representative. Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Mincer.
Rob, the way you're holding the phone, it seems to me it's like it's off screen and I wouldn't be able to see it or the timing.
Do you want a warning?
There you go.
Okay.
No, you're holding it slightly to the right of at least on my, yeah, there you go. Perfect. Thank you so much. My name is Ty Menser. I'm running for the Thurston County Board of County Commissioners, District 3. I am the incumbent. If it looks like I'm in jail right now, I'm not. It's my daughter's 15th birthday and she wanted to spend the day in Seattle. So I'm in a parking garage. Apologize for that. A little bit about myself. My parents were public school teachers. They grew up in Western Kentucky, moved to Southern California just before I was born. They divorced when I was 2 years old and remarried 2 other public school teachers. So I was raised by 4 teachers, and my wife is a first grade teacher and her mom is a teacher. So public education runs deep and through my family at every level. And I have 2 teenage children at Capitol High School right now I'm very proud of. I studied government at Harvard. I studied law at UC Berkeley. I had a 21-year career as an attorney, focusing on family law, criminal law, and that included a big dose of public defense. I ran for commissioner in November of 2018, or in 2018, and was elected in November. When I'm not lawyering or commissioning, I play the banjo in a bluegrass band called the Holy Mountain Boys. I tried to deliver on some big promises I made in 2018, and I feel like I was successful. First, I talked about reforming the county's fiscal practices. We did that through a series of policy reforms, reinvigorating a balanced budget policy that wasn't being followed, creating the county's very first rainy day fund, seeding it with $3 million, increasing the fund balance target, kind of a technical point, but it's very important, bringing county practices in line with generally accepted local government accounting practices. And all of those steps led Standard & Poor to uptick our bond rating this past month to the highest in county history. We're about to issue bonds, so this will save taxpayers millions of dollars in the upcoming years. Second, I wanted to attack the pocket gopher issue by working collaboratively with Fish and Wildlife and get an incidental take permit that would balance the needs of development in South Thurston County with compliance with federal law and protection of endangered species. And on July 12th, 2022, we accomplished that. I also wanted to draw on my criminal justice background to work on a series of policy issues related to reducing reliance on incarceration, where we've got mental health and substance use issues. Also took on COVID-19 as the chair of your Board of Health, and we directed a lot of our local money back into the community to support local business. I'm running because there's a lot of work left to do. I want to continue work we've begun on housing, water quality, closing gaps in our mental health system, climate change, and racism. And frankly, I am not convinced that my opponent would continue any of that work. I've learned a ton about county government in the last 4 years. I'm asking folks to let me put that work, that experience back to work for you in another term. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And then we'll go to Ms. Dolio.
Well, thanks so much for doing this forum and for all the services that you provide in our community. I'm Beth Dolio, and I have lived in the 22nd Legislative District for over 2 years, for over 2 decades. And I've raised my family here, and I'm running for the 22nd Legislative District, position 1. A little bit about my background. I grew up in a small town in Illinois. My parents were both public school educators, like ties. I didn't have 4 of them, I only had 2. My dad was also a Marine. And in middle school, my mom was an activist and part of the League of Women Voters. And we were going door to door together, asking our neighbors to support the creation of a public health department. And so from that very young age, I really learned that we have to take responsibility and fight for the kind of future and the kind of community that we want to live in. And as your state legislator previously, from 2017 to 2021, I worked for a future that invests in our people and our planet. And I will continue to do so if I'm lucky enough to return to the legislature in 2023. Just a little on my professional background. I was the first executive director of Washington Conservation Voters, and I was an organizer for Pro-Choice Washington, protecting full reproductive freedom. I'm also in favor of making sure that gender affirming care is available as well. I've worked at Climate Solutions, focused on combating climate change for the last 17 years and working to make the Northwest a clean energy powerhouse. Today, I serve as the board president of the Parks, Arts, Recreation, and Culture Foundation Board. I also serve on the board of the YMCA, Quixote Communities, and Win with Women. I was also a member of Victory Fund, which is a nationwide organization dedicated to electing LGBTQ+ people to all levels of government, from dog catchers all the way through to the congressional. And I'm proud to have earned their endorsement, but I can no longer serve on the board because I am a candidate. As a state representative, I really brought my experience to bear to galvanize support for some of the nation's most ambitious state legislation on workers' rights, climate, environment, housing, social justice, women's rights, and more. I am, from your perspective, from this organization's perspective, you asked why I'm the best person for the job. I'm actually identify as LGBTQ, identifying as bisexual. I am also the parent of a son who identifies as bisexual or pansexual as well. I was a strong member of that caucus and played a very significant role in the Gender X with the Department of Licensing, empowering people and being there at the hearing myself to testify in favor of that. I was also a really strong advocate for the funding for the Tacoma Housing Authority CYS project Arlington Drive, which has beds specifically for LGBTQ youth. So I hope that I can earn your vote.
Thank you. And then we'll go right into the questions. All right, and with these, you'll have 2 minutes. The first question, we'll start with Ms. Dolio, and then we'll go around the room. So have you ever volunteered with or supported any LGBTQ+ organization? Feel free to include any events in which you participated.
Yeah, so I've been a long-term member of the organizing committee and also a contributor to the Fighting for the Majority event that started about 25 years ago, when after the legislature passed the Defense of Marriage Act, we were not going to stand up and be a punching bag And so they organized back then a very great event that funds the House and Senate Democratic caucuses in the state legislature. And I'm on the organizing committee and I'm actively currently raising money for that event. If anybody wants to come, it's in Seattle on October 26th, I think, or 29th, let's see. So it's October 26th in Seattle. I also, as I mentioned before, was on the Victory Fund board and have been an active goer to Pizza Klatch events, thanks to Steve Drew's leadership there. He definitely helped get me to those events and helped me donate large amounts of money. Certainly something that I support strongly. So I think those are, and then also serving on the LGBTQ caucus in the state legislature for those 4 years and making sure that our voice in this community is represented fully in our state legislative process.
Thank you. And then we'll go over to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you. I was slow on the draw there. So I haven't organized or worked at a nonprofit that works on LGBTQ issues specifically. However, a big part of my work over the last 7 years as an elected official has been focused on housing. We know that housing scarcity, which results in increased rent prices and home prices that are far out of reach for most people, working families included and low-income people, that lack of housing and homelessness disproportionately impacts LGBTQ youth, especially foster youth. So that's been an area that I have focused on. And then I've hired staff within my own campaign team that identify as LGBTQ, and I've supported legislation this last session and spoke in support of legislation that requires insurance companies to pay for gender affirming care. That was something that was already on the books, but they were finding creative ways to get around that. So we changed the law to make sure it's really clear that they have to pay for that care. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Drew. Sorry.
Well, I should begin by saying back at you, Beth, you're certainly a hero of mine. So yes, I was asked to join the informal board operating for roughly a decade under the tireless leadership of Lynn Grotsky, but had not yet reached that strength to attract the kind of grants that could allow for full-time staff and a broader service to the LGBTQ plus population of throughout Thurston County. And so, yes, I became a board member. I served as treasurer initially as fundraising chair. That's where I tapped everyone I knew, including Beth. Thank you, Beth, for contributions toward that. I had also brought this exhibit, Family, Friends, and Neighbors, to the state capitol during the Hands Off Washington period. I think I also made about 1,000 buttons for that campaign just as a volunteer and carried literature that political season. I've had some involvement. It stems from a sister who's bisexual, and not the struggles that she had. Our family was very, her family disowned her, and how impactful that was. And then in our community, absolutely, it's LGBTQ plus youth find themselves homeless when they aren't supported at home, as you well know. And it's BIPOC LGBTQ plus youth that have the hardest pull. And again, this is what drove me to serve on the SBSCC board. It's housing and to reduce barriers for those that can rise up with. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Mr. Mincer.
Okay, thank you. Yes, well, the leader of my campaign team is a LGBTQ community member that I hired, and she was the best person for the job, and I'm very proud to have her. In Thurston County, we began raising the flag for Pride Month back, I think 2017, actually, before I came on the board. I made sure that was the case when I joined the board, and we do a recognition through a board proclamation every month and try to reach out to members of the community. we have a lot of funding that comes through that that goes to organizations in the community and that provide that kind of support. And that's always very important and high on my priority list of supporting those organizations. The county, the issues that the sheriff's candidates talked about with racial equity a couple of years ago that raised to the fore, we declared community and public health. And as part of that, we stood up a council, a racial equity and inclusion council. And the scope of this goes beyond racial equity into inclusion and belonging. It comes along with a lot of training that we've started among county employees. And I think that that's going to make a big impact. I was endorsed in 2018 by the organization, which had a different name. And this year, I believe there's a new organization called the Washington Equality Pact, which endorsed my reelection and gave me an outstanding rating, which I'm very proud of for the work I've done over the last 4 years. So I would just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Snauta.
Thank you. One of the most important things that I'm really proud of, working with the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs on a coalition on LGBTQ plus community and ensuring that not only all our deputies, but also all our officers within the state of Washington are educated on the LGBT community and what is, how do we start off on conversations? So making sure that all our, right now, all our deputies with our racial and equity person that was recently hired with the commissioners to make sure of how we are addressing the and ensuring that not only are they're not discriminated at their jobs, or medically are they discriminated, or even harassed, but we want to make sure that they are all treated fairly, and we want to protect the most vulnerable. And that's what we've been striving to do, working also with the Family Support Center on the BIPOC community, ensuring that they have housing available for them. So the best part about my job so far is being able to be involved in those community organizations seek out to benefit the LGBTQ plus community and the BIPOC community. So just making sure we're doing it all. So that's the best thing I can say about what we're trying to do as a sheriff's office.
Thank you, sir. And then Mr. Sanders.
Yeah. So the one thing that I've done recently is that my campaign consultant identifies as the LGBT community, and so I do feel like I've taken that step to try and get that inclusiveness, and it's been cool to work with him directly because as we go through the campaign, I get to pick his brain on these kinds of issues and how we can be more inclusive, how can we better recruit people from this community. As far as donating my time to a specific event, I have not. My focus throughout my life has been on youth stuff. So we've done Shop with a Cop, kind of to piggyback off what Stephen Drew said, though, you know, as a biracial man, I know that this stuff affects, so for children who identify as LGBTQ plus, who are also people of color, it affects them in a far greater rate. And so participating in things like the Shop with a Cop events, which is something that I had the opportunity to participate in as an 8-year-old who was homeless, has been huge for me in getting back to the community. Veterans for home stuff with that, done some charity basketball games to fund the Shop with a Cop and to fund things like our Day of Champions. And so, you know, when it comes to this kind of stuff, the biggest thing that I bring to the table in this regard, I think, is my youth. I come from a different generation, a generation where, you know, all my life, this is LGBTQ plus, this kind of stuff has been the norm for me. It's not something I have to learn. It's something that I grew up with, the people that I grew up with. And so I feel like I have just a natural connection, especially you can draw the parallels between racism and transphobic and being transphobic and all that kind of stuff. So thanks.
Thank you. And so one more board member did just join us, Larry. He doesn't have his camera on right now, but he's here. And so we'll move on to the next question. What actions have you taken in non-LGBTQ plus organizations to promote advocacy and inclusion? With Mr. Sanders.
So in this regard, it's hard to say what one specific thing, right? I think for me, the biggest thing has just been living a life of inclusion, and especially as a deputy sheriff, the work that we do out in the community involves this kind of stuff. You know, and then it's frustrating for us in our society to see these issues continue to kind of rear their ugly heads. But, you know, as a deputy sheriff who still works at the ground level, I get to see the racism, transphobic, homophobic, all these different things. And, you know, a lot of this is protected by the First Amendment. And so, you know, what I've strived to do as a deputy sheriff and going around and doing my job is to really take the time with people, right? I mean, there are issues in this community that are constitutionally protected, right? I mean, free speech can also be that is not inclusive. And so one thing that I've prided myself on is that I do think that these things in our community are there's no law enforcement action to be taken when we show up on these scenes, and it's really a case of free speech. And one thing I pride myself on doing is taking the extra time to speak with these people and make sure that their voices are heard from a law enforcement capacity, and kind of representing John on his behalf when I'm out doing my duties. And so, you know, I think this kind of stuff, it has less to do with specific examples that I can think of, and more about just how I carry myself in my everyday duties. And the fact that I've always tried to remain inclusive. And, you know, I've got, it's kind of one of those things where you have to lead by example.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Mr. Snaza?
That's a great question, because there's a few things. First off, I can start off with our recruiting. In our recruiting, we recruit all, and we make ourselves available, and we try to be as inclusive. And I can tell you that I have men and women both in my organization who choose not to talk about how they feel about the LGBTQ, but are involved in it, and trying to get them to be more open about it. So we're more open about how we can do better serve our community and them within our own organization. But not only do we do that, the best part about my job is being involved with the organizations that do involve themselves with LGBTQ plus and BIPOC. And I mentioned earlier, the Family Support Center, Boys and Girls Club, Big Brothers Big Sister, being a board member of Big Brothers Big Sister, being a board member of Behavioral Health Services, being involved in the Raise for Rowan, being involved in our veterans programs. All those programs include working with the LGBTQ plus community as well. So I try to be a voice of being positive and openness, and how we in law enforcement can better serve them and protect them from being, well, better serve them is the best way I could say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Drew.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay. What actions have you taken in non-LGBTQ organizations to promote advocacy and inclusion?
Interesting. Well, I think that as a manager of an office, I approach that job and lead my team with a strong sense that you have to lean in to create diversity on your team, to attract diverse employees to work for Thurston County and in the assessor's office. And so directly as assessor, that's my role. I don't have a legislative authority. In my role as a trustee at the community college, I and the other trustees and the president and the entire administration, this is a primary area of work that we focus on, not just access to the entire community, but the leaning in to provide that support and that sense of community for the students who do come to the institution. So yeah, in my role as assessor, as a manager, in my role there at the community college, in the community, in a variety of ways, and my work in other nonprofits. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you. And we'll go to Mr. Minster.
Thank you. I think it's really important if you're somebody who doesn't identify as a particular group that, you know, may have that that feeling of lack of inclusion. It's really important to put yourself in a context where you can understand that. For me, I spent time living with a family in Mexico learning Spanish. And I also spent one of my semesters in law school as a student in Santiago, Chile. So you get a sense, it's great. It's really important to, you know, to have that perspective of what it means to sort of not fit in. I brought that work back with me to the United States, and I was one of the founding members of a group called the Central American Refugee Clinic. This was about a Salvadoran community in Berkeley, where I was a student, that was facing, you know, there was incredibly horrific things happening in their country, and young people were fleeing the country because they'd seen family members murdered because of connections to you know, resistance groups by the government. So we helped those folks. Directly, your questions about advocacy and inclusion, that's what it was all about. It was listening to their story, helping them put it in the best terms, understanding the law of political asylum, and then advocating for them to try to include them in this country because they had a legitimate reason. And this is very important. And these issues about immigration are important to me. I've taken that work forward here in Thurston County. I'm involved with Strengthening Sanctuary Alliance, which is a group that's active here in Thurston County. And, you know, it's very disheartening to me that this debate, this very highly politically charged debate about immigration and borders, seems to just wash under the rug, you know, true political asylum candidates who, you know, that's a fabric of what this country's about. And it really disgusts me, frankly, to see to get political points, just completely ignore the human rights involved in these folks and their right to be here under the laws and customs of our country.
Thank you. And we'll go to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you. So I think back to when I was a legislative aide to former Representative Chris Reichdahl, and we had a local nonprofit, GRUB, that empowers at-risk youth. They were really interested in expanding some of their work. And so Representative Reichdahl sponsored a proviso to get more funding for a pilot, so we could hopefully see more programs like that, help more young people in Washington. And I volunteered my time after work to help them organize, learn about the legislative process, write letters to their legislators, coordinated them coming to the Capitol campus and testifying at a public hearing, which was the most beautiful sight to see. And we were successful in that proviso moving forward. And more than that, they had an intern there that was working with me, and they learned those skills of advocacy that then they could use for future efforts. In addition to that, when the former president was elected, within a month, I worked to draft a sanctuary city resolution and worked with local advocates in our communities to consult with them to see if that resolution was something that they could support, and if I had missed anything. And within 6 weeks of that person being elected, we were able to pass that resolution, which is lightning speed at the local government level. Even after the resolution passed, we were able to meet with the police chief and talk and consult about its implementation to make it even better, to ensure that people were safe and that they would not be profiled or denied services from the city of Olympia for their immigration status. So those are two examples.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Ms. Dolio.
Great, thank you. Well, first and foremost, it's my own personal journey to recognize, I put a tremendous amount of time into my own personal journey to recognize my own biases and to have strategies to combat those, and also to really understand institutional and systemic racism and how we can break those down in order to create a more equitable society. And I strive to integrate all of that work and learning into all aspects of my life, as well as into my policymaking. In terms of what I've actually done in that space, I did originate the bill that later passed, that working with a constituent from one of the school districts who felt understanding around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we started working on a bill with OSPI to actually require cultural competency training or diversity, equity, and inclusion training for all school employees. And ultimately that bill did pass the legislature. I also have worked with another constituent, and I believe it was Strengthening Sanctuary as well, on making sure that if ICE was on a school grounds looking to deport or find someone, that there was a very specific system in which that ICE personnel would be directed in order to avoid potential deportation of that family and that student, and the separation coming home and to a family that wasn't gone. So those are two of the things that I've done in that, specifically in that space. But again, it is a lifelong journey, and I continue to read and explore my own biases and integrate that into my policymaking.
Thank you. Okay. All right, on to our next question. Tell us about any written non-discrimination policies that include sexual orientation and gender identity you have or will establish for staff or employees of your campaign or office. If you don't have such policies or plans for such, please tell us why. And we will start with Ms. Dolio.
So you're looking for a response to a campaign personnel policy that is that
campaign or office, like where your position office.
So the state legislature has invested tremendous amount of time and energy into personnel issues, and sort of writing a lot of the wrongs that have been done over the years. It's an odd power dynamic in the legislature, and there's been, a significant amount of sexual harassment, of racism, that I think that we have worked, particularly as a Democratic House caucus, on trying to right those wrongs from the past. That has involved significant amount of training. Each of our gatherings for caucuses involves a fairly significant amount of time of it is spent on diversity, equity, and inclusion training, bringing in different experts on that in that field, and working with us as a caucus to help us both identify our own biases and also to work as a caucus to make sure that we are having the best possible employment services and employment practices around these issues in the legislature. And I feel like we've come a long way in the last 6 years since I was first elected, in making sure that people feel welcome and not harassed, sexually harassed in particular. I think that was a very significant issue. So in terms of having a personnel policy up, I do that with my campaign team. My campaign team is pretty small. It's like one person, but certainly we work together to make sure that we are working with our volunteers and other, to avoid any sort of lack of understanding in this space. So thanks for bringing that up. It's a great question.
All right, thank you. And we will go to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you. Well, in my legislative office, we follow state law. So any employee can clearly see the non-discrimination policies that we have in our office, legislative offices in our my own campaign team consists of 1 or 2 people. So I do not have that policy or a policy for my own campaign team. That is a really great idea. No one's ever asked me that before. So I was off. I could also share that information with the House Democratic Caucus campaign side so they can see that information. During my day job, I've actually worked on our brand newly formed equity committee that was formed in 2021. I worked on that for a year, and we did work on new policies and a survey to survey staff and their life experiences, ethnicities, gender, a lot of, and we've been able to actually increase our diversity by 50% in 2 years at my organization. We still have more work to do, and this is one of them, having our own policy on my campaign. So I look forward to working with you on that.
All right, thank you. We'll go to Mr. Minzer.
Okay, thank you. So Thurston County, I'm sure has policies, or in our HR group, and maybe Stephen Drew, who's been in county government longer, might know better than I. We have not had an issue come up during the 3.5 years that I've been a commissioner, and hopefully that's because the policies we have are working. I'm absolutely committed to this kind of policy. So if there's a gap identified, let me know. I'll have open ears to try to address that. That's the kind of thing that I'm hoping our new inclusion council can take a look at and bring to commissioners' attention where they see gaps. And we're going to task them with just that kind of work. I know that we are developing. The one thing I know we are working on that's new is an effort at recruiting and hiring and workforce diversity in various ways. That spills into all areas of folks that are underrepresented in the county. So I'm hoping, and we have committed to that through a staffing person. And I would just mention that my opponent in this race has criticized my hiring of that person, and I just respectfully disagree. It's critical work for Thurston County, and Sheriff Nas has made reference to it a couple of times, and how his department's using it. And assessor and all of our groups are working with our racial equity and inclusion coordinator. And that work is important. It's very fundamental to public safety. So I support that. And any gaps that we see in Thurston County, you'll have an advocate for that, for redressing that. Thank you.
And Mr. Drew.
Thank you. Well, campaigns are a project conducted at home. There are no but the idea of a policy for a campaign that has, particularly when there's a number of employees, is an excellent idea. And Ty nailed it pretty well. I thank you for the kudos for being around a long time, and I should know more. But honestly, what I know from being around a long time is it's difficult to hire BIPOC employees. They don't see themselves in that space as a county employee, particularly general courthouse. And so the hiring of an inclusion council, of a DEI person to lead analysis, to develop policies and procedures and outreach that can bridge that challenge is a very important step, and was much underrated by Ty. It was an important vote. It wouldn't have happened without Ty and Carolina on the council, and transformative is what I expect it will be. So we're working closely with that person in our office and giving the best feedback we can, that we have a tough time attracting applicants from the BIPOC community, and it's disappointing. And when we have, I mean, I hired a great gentleman who was work visa from Africa, was working for Amazon and a really abusive employer-employee relationship, you know, and he came to work for us and excelled. In the end, he was a CPA in Africa, so he was able to get a job as a comptroller and left us, which is very, very disappointing because we were looking to diversify our staff, and he was a rarefied applicant. So the challenge goes on, and the solution is that we all have to lean in.
Thank you. Mr. Snata.
That's a good question. So I do have a small campaign group of individuals, but I do have one individual with the LGBTQ community that does help me once in a while. And I really do appreciate that person's help. And actually, even bringing things to light that maybe how to make better word choices when we're speaking. The other part is in law enforcement, we do have policies and procedures that we are required to follow, and making sure that we are being fair and equitable, and that we are holding people accountable for harassment, sexual harassment, or racial disparity. So we do hold people accountable for those actions. The best part about the diversity is that we do work with our equity person from the county that Commissioner Menzer has spoke of, and how we are doing on recruiting, especially with an individual who is my recruiter that is of part of the BIPOC community. So I really believe that we are doing everything we can, and that our agency, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, is very diverse, and we're trying to make it as diverse as our community is. And I believe we're doing a really good job at that. So that's how I feel about it.
Thank you. And then Mr. Sanders.
Well, I'm going to disagree with the sheriff because I've had charged jokes towards me 2 times now, and I've reported it twice, and nothing's been done. So, you know, when we talk about the inclusion side of things and racial equity and including the LGBTQ community, when I talk about my campaign team, it's very small. So I've got, when you talk about the campaign team, I've got someone who identifies as LGBTQ, and I've got a person of color on my team, and then I'm biracial. So that's my team. As far as written policy, I don't think it's my place as someone who doesn't identify with LGBTQ. Personally, I'm a straight biracial male. I think the big thing is to listen, and that's where I'll be leaning on Nicole Miller, who's part of our racial equity. She's the one who runs that. That's going to be time. That's going to be when I become the sheriff, where I will sit down with her and go over things as far as what we can do to better recruit these people, because it's a sensitive subject, right? Like, I know that not everyone who's part of the LGBTQ community wants to disclose that they belong to that community. So it can become difficult to recruit that, because if you don't know, then you don't know, and it doesn't show up as a statistic or anywhere. And so, you know, I think the big thing too is allowing people within the department to navigate their own issues. You know, one thing that is disappointing to see is when administrators become heavy-handed and they start navigating and making choices for people on their behalf of whether or not they want to do something. And so what I'm basically vouching for is that we actually take these issues seriously when they do come up, and that we hold people to a high standard, but that we're also not picking and choosing, because that's what's currently going on in the sheriff's office. If you're part of the top tier of employees that everyone likes, who are all white, straight males, it's okay. You can say whatever you want. But you know, if you're at the bottom, and well, then, you know, the hammer comes down on you. So that's something that I definitely want to change, is just the consistency in the culture.
Thank you. All right. We're good. Okay. So we're going to move on to our next question. How do you feel about family life education and guidance programs in public schools that offer age-appropriate, non-judgmental information on sexuality, sexually transmitted disease, and contraception? Have you advocated for such programs in the past? Be specific if you have not, and why. And we will start with Mr. Sanders.
Yeah, I think the key word there is going to be age appropriate. And I think that's where it becomes difficult. And that's, I don't think that there's as much disagreement on this topic as far as the topic itself. I think the age appropriate is where the subjectiveness comes into this. You know, growing up, I went to 15 schools in the first 10 years of my life. And so it just so happened that as I was going and moving to all these schools, you know, sometimes 1-2 months at a school and then off to the next school, between DV shelters and homeless shelters and whatnot, the sex ed classes like over and over again. I don't know why they all just happen to land on like consecutive days for me. So, you know, I've been through like a lot of sex ed classes, oddly enough, as a kid. And I think the big thing is that we have to all agree on what the age appropriate is. I do believe that sex ed belongs in public schools because it is part of life. It is part of being a child, growing up and learning and being safe. But the age appropriateness, I think, is where ultimately it's going to be up to the legislature and the people to vote on to figure out where that number actually fits. So it is something that I advocate for. I do think it's appropriate. Especially once you get into the middle school and high school areas. I mean, I think the earliest I ever had a sex ed class was, I want to say 11 years old. You know, it was very basic, right? We're not here to go into a bunch of details. We're trying to get into basically just the public safety side of things and keeping our kids healthy and safe and making sure they understand the consequences of their actions. And so I do support it. I just think that we all need to come and compromise what a reasonable, you know, appropriate age sex ed class is and how that looks.
All right, thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Snaza.
What a good question, especially that I actually do have a grandson who's in first grade. And what I would say is that I am in agreement with age appropriate, but also the best part about entire life is also knowing a lot of teachers, having a lot of family members who are teachers. And I can tell you that from all of the conversations that we had, definitely a beneficial to the children, and that it also and I haven't had one person disagree that it also builds on the child's self-esteem about how they are dealing with their own sexuality and how they are processing this information, and that they feel comfortable going to those teachers and asking them more questions, more so than, well, the teachers that and the relatives I speak to, they even feel that they probably get more questions from the student than those students ask of their parents. And it might be a thing because they feel more confident about being able to speak to somebody who does talk about it. And so I'm definitely for it, just because of all the people that I know and I'm related to are very supportive of that very aspect as well. So thanks.
And we will go to Mr. Drew. Mr. Drew?
Okay.
Or is it just us? Okay. All right. We'll go to Mr. Mincer, and then if Mr. Drew comes back, we'll go to him. Oh, all right. All right. We'll go to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you so much. So in 2020, the legislature passed comprehensive sex education. I was not there yet. I got there in 2021, but I do support our schools providing medically accurate and age-appropriate comprehensive sex education. As it stands now, K through 3rd grade does not get any sex health content instructed to them. They do, however, the courses allow for being inclusive of all students and protected classes and affirmative consent and healthy relationships, and also social emotional learning. We did hear, when I have been in the legislature, from parents that have concerns about these types of courses being taught in school. I think it's important that we don't assume that every single child has a positive, affirming home household, and that they should have access to that information about their bodies and about their health, regardless of what type of home environment that they're in. So I think it's really important that we have that baseline information for them so they can be healthy and have medically accurate information.
All right, it looks like we got Mr. Drew back.
Sorry.
Oh, you're okay.
And what?
Do you need the question again?
Yeah, if you would.
Okay.
Please.
Yeah. How do you feel about family life education and guidance programs in public schools that offer age-appropriate, non-judgmental information on sexuality, sexually transmitted disease, and contraception? Have you advocated for such programs in the past? Be specific if you have not, why?
Well, as a parent, I certainly didn't object to it when my son was going through the school system. In my involvement with Pizza Clatch, this was a subject for the organization, and we had to navigate through multiple school districts, school boards on segments of this question. I think there is an age-appropriate concern. I think it has to do with how you tee up the discussion. But it's very important to navigate that concern. The education is important to the safety of our youth. They are, frankly, sexually active at a much younger age than when old crusty folks like me were in school. And they need to be fully equipped to get through their younger years safely and not find themselves abused or harmed in any way. And so that education is an important part of the curriculum, and as challenging it is for the entire spectrum of parents and for the administrations, it's all the more important that they double down in their focus to find an appropriate way to get this education forward in our schools. Now, I don't have direct involvement as my son has grown, and I'm no longer on the board of Pizza Clatch, but that's my mindset on the subject. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and then we'll go to Ms. Dolio.
Great. Well, this is certainly an important question, and something that I was in the legislature when we did pass the comprehensive sex education bill. I did vote for that bill. I would vote for it again. I think the age appropriate question is an important one, and I think it is age appropriate to make sure that our kindergartners absolutely know what is appropriate in terms of touching and what is not. And unfortunately, I also did a heartbreaking tour through our Monarch Center here in Thurston County, and too many kids are experiencing sexual abuse, and that is something that really like never goes away with a person. And so there's no question in my mind kids about what's appropriate and what's not, because they don't know. And it's super important. So anyway, I'm pretty passionate about this. I feel really strongly that we should be talking about this as a community, as a society, and in our schools to try and keep our kids safe and knowledgeable as they start going through puberty about what does all that mean? What's going on in my body? Why am I feeling this way? And really having conversations about that, because it's super important. And I am pretty close to that because I have an 18-year-old and a 23-year-old, and unfortunately they were stuck at home in COVID, so they didn't have a lot of that opportunity to sort of like go through some of that with their peers around them. But I think it's super important, and I'm glad that Chris Rakedahl led the charge, and that we actually got that across the finish line, and that every student in the state, unless their parents opt them out, have access to good sex education.
Thank you. And Mr. Menser, it's good to see you're back. And were you able to hear the question?
Yes, I did. I got kicked out at some point. I heard the question and I wanted to answer it. I'm 100% supportive of this type of education. My mom, I mentioned, was a teacher. She started as a PE teacher, but then became a school counselor. She was the one that taught the classes. And I talked about the dozen or so public educators in my family. They would unanimously support this and, let the experts decide what to teach when. But I can tell you that the school brought it forward in 5th grade. Well, my mom brought home the projector and the transparencies when I was in 3rd grade and gave me the full, version of the education earlier than it was brought in school. And any chance, I have not had the opportunity to advocate as a county commissioner just yet, but if any opportunity that would be provided to me, I would eagerly and vigorously advocate for. Thank you.
All right. And did I miss anyone?
Nope, I think that was everyone.
All right. All right. We're going to go to our last question before we start closing. What are your solutions for the homelessness crisis in Thurston County? We'll start with Ms. Bateman.
Was it just me, or did you, I couldn't hear you. Yeah.
Oh.
The audio stopped. So
The
the last question, what are the solutions to?
what are your solutions? My internet's unstable. I apologize. What are your solutions for the homelessness crisis in Thurston County?
Oh, well, I sponsored a bill last year, House Bill 1782, that would legalize modest home choices statewide, including those are things like duplexes, triplexes, row. Those types of modest homes used to be legal to build in most cities until they started outlawing them. And when we're in a housing crisis and we're 250,000 homes short, we see increasing rent prices and increasing mortgage prices. The only people that can afford to buy homes in Thurston County are people that have wealth. And we're seeing people get increases of rent prices, $200, $300, $400, I'm even hearing $600 a month. Disproportionately, that will impact low-income people, people of color, and LGBTQ individuals. So what we need to do is we need to be pro-housing and we need to legalize modest home choices. So that was the bill that bringing that back next year. We can also pass legislation that will allow for the construction of accessory dwelling units or mother-in-law apartments. These are more affordable home types versus single family or apartments. However, we're dollars in subsidized housing, including significantly increasing our investment in the Housing Trust Fund. We did make significant capital budget investments this last time around in permanent supportive housing and subsidized housing for low-income people. It's a huge focus of mine, and I will continue to work on it with my future partner in the 22nd, Representative Dolio. And I would love to talk more about that. I could talk about housing for quite some time, and I'm really happy that you asked the question.
And then we're going to go to Ms. Dolio.
Great. Well, housing is an issue that has been a very consistent focus of mine prior to joining the legislature and in the legislature. And actually, the last 2 years not being in the legislature, I have been working across the state with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. I passed a bill that made the work that Jessica did here, Representative Bateman did here in Olympia to pass a home fund. We made that a councilmanic vote so that state county commissions and city councils can take advantage of that without having to take it to the voters. Given that it's a housing crisis, that seemed like a really smart thing to do. And so that currently, I worked across the state to help communities actually pass that. And Thurston County did so with some of the leadership from Commissioner Menser, but so did many other communities. And I think we have a trust fund, an annual trust fund at the local level of $31 million going to housing for our most vulnerable neighbors, those at 60% average median income and below. I agree with Representative Bateman. We need to continue to invest in our housing trust fund and increase the dollars and the workforce in our mental health and chemical dependency as well. And then we need to build more housing and really get at those middle income 80% to 120%, that kind of middle space, so that we are building more units. As she says, we are way behind in that. So I look forward to continue working on that, and hope that we can solve this crisis in a reasonable amount of time, because it is really not okay to have so many people without a roof over their heads and a key to lock their door.
Thank you. And then Mr. Minzer. Sorry.
So I agree with everything Jessica and Beth said, and the question is, what is my strategy for solving this? Part of my strategy is elect Jessica Bateman and Beth Dolio to the state house, because they're, if their passion didn't come through in their answers just now, let me tell you, they have a passion for this issue and a knowledge of this issue, and they're going to make things easier for us at the local level. I also want them working on the taxation system. Regressive taxation in Washington creates a situation where I think we're just, why is homelessness happening? Well, when you tax the richest, Washingtonians 3% and the poorest Washingtonians 18%, it's not a shocking situation that's going to break some people's budget and create a situation where they're needlessly struggling with housing security. So those are policies that our state legislators can work on. At the local level, we've worked hard to create a new funding sources, the home fund that Beth mentioned, that she put that option before us. It's never super politically popular to pass a tax increase, but this was an incredibly important resource that triples the amount of resources for permanent supportive housing in our community. It brought the rest of the county in line with Olympia that had already stepped up through voter initiative, but we know this is a regional issue. And so it didn't seem right that Olympia was bearing a permanent supportive housing. The county needed to do this, and we held a public hearing and had overwhelming support. The Regional Housing Council was something that we also created. I've only got a few seconds left, but this was incredibly important to get all voices at the table, to take the new funding streams that are coming, and we have some new ones, and make sure that they're deployed in the most impactful way throughout the community. All the cities sit at the table. We put this together, and it helped us seize a lot of the money that was unleashed by the state in the right-of-way program, and allowed us to put a plan together and we're gonna have $37 million coming through Thurston County and the Regional Housing Council.
Thank you. And then we're going to go to Mr. Snaza.
All right, there we go. Sorry about that. So Commissioner Menzer probably heard me speak of this way too many times. So one of the things I want to make really clear is that all homeless people are the same. And in my job, going out and making contacts with homeless individuals as to what puts them in their situations might be a different reason than what maybe people are going, and they might get a different answer. What I will say is that what I see in homeless camps are addiction, co-occurring disorder with mental health crisis. What I've table and I've asked probably for the last 3+ years is that to open up our empty jail below my office, had over 400 beds in it, and that we create a place and are individuals able to go there and sleep, but there's a kitchen there, there's a medical facility, washer and dryer to do dishes, there's an area there to attend classes. There's an area there to get addiction assistance, mental health assistance. It's a place that I suggested a long time ago that I felt that to deal with on a daily basis when they come across it, so that the legislators, all the bigwigs, can come together with a better solution. I know that everybody has a different idea of how to deal with. I just believe that a lot of people mix compassion with apathy. And I really believe that we can fix this problem together. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Sanders.
Yeah, thanks. So as the only sheriff candidate who was homeless, I can tell you that if you've never experienced it, it's worse than you can imagine. Right. To actually live through it, especially as a child, it's difficult to articulate just how disparaging it is to be a homeless kid. And so, you know, kind of to capitalize on what John said, I think opening up the jail downstairs, that's something I brought up forever, either whether it be homelessness or a mental health facility. We have a jail that's sitting there that's just rotting away. And so it's also important to also understand that, again, not all homeless people are the same, right? I mean, yes, we were homeless, but we didn't feel homeless. We felt displaced. We felt like we didn't have a spot to live in, but we didn't feel like we were grungy or dirty. And so I think it's important to understand and really educate the public. That's the biggest thing, right? Because people keep harping down on the homeless, but not all homeless people are the same. And to understand, there are people who are on the brink of losing their homes. They kind of fall into that homelessness area, but there's also people that are pushing shopping carts down into transient camps and downtown Olympia. And so a big thing that I push for, that I'm super supportive of, is the tiny homes. I think that is, we all know that the first step to getting people clean and healthy and out of the homeless situation is to provide stable housing. They have to have stable housing. If there's nowhere for them to lock their door and lock their belongings, they're always going to fall into a pattern of homelessness, drug abuse, and other issues. So I think the housing thing is going to be important. For me, I will be working heavily with Commissioner Mejia. I'm not sure if Commissioner Menser is part of it, but I know Commissioner Mejia and some of the Lacey City Council members are working on a homeless court, and veterans court, where basically we have to take a blended approach to this. We cannot just arrest our way out of homelessness, and we cannot just throw endless amounts of money at it either. So it's going to take a blended approach. It's going to take cooperation with our state reps, our commissioners, and our city council. And that's why I'm happy to have the endorsement of so many of them.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Drew.
Well, as assessor, I both have a very firm grasp on house prices and the cost of housing and the escalation of that and how that bears on this challenge or demonstrates this challenge. I don't have legislative authority, but for the Assessors Association, I'm frequently in discussion with legislators about proposals. And I've worked, both with Jessica and with Beth when she was in the legislature before on housing proposals. And I lean in when I get that phone call. I try to educate the assessors that don't experience the same challenge in their region of the state, to hopefully build consensus to where we can support an appropriate tax credit where that's the right incentive, and to think creatively about ways to draft the solutions that the legislature brings forward. So most of the questions you've asked today, right, they're about challenges that each of them require 100 or more simultaneous solutions. And we can't fix housing with just one thing. It's tiny homes, it's rungs in the ladder. I mean, Derek, you're amazing. Somehow to turn the kind of offensive adage on its head, it wasn't bootstraps. It was Derek, I assume you somehow reached the fifth rung of the ladder and pulled yourself up. And it's a problem. It's a problem that all those rungs aren't there. Tiny homes are a rung. Manufactured housing is an important rung, yet doesn't get a tax incentive. And quote affordable housing in the urban area of our cities that has the rent and above $1,000 is not affordable housing. I don't care what percentage you apply to it. And so it's a huge challenge, and I'm engaged every legislative session, and my phone is always welcomes a phone call to brainstorm, even though I don't have that legislative authority. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our final question, this is for closing. Tell us something you would like voters to know about you that you haven't been able to share with the earlier questions today. And we will start with Ms. Dolio.
Well, that's interesting. That's a good question. Something that I want them to know that I haven't been able to share here. Well, I guess I'll go with climate change. I am very committed to combating climate change. It has been a focus in my professional career for about 17 years now, and I am definitely committed to trying to create a planet that is sustainable for the duration for our kids. And I think, you know, that's an important thing for our kids today. We haven't really talked much about youth and particularly LGBTQ youth that are experiencing a great sense of despair. And, you know, I want to give them hope that we can solve this problem and that we're going to do everything possible to do that. So I was the sponsor of a bill that does require large commercial buildings. Those are the buildings that release the most greenhouse gas emissions, comply with an efficiency standard, and that comes into play in 2026. I was also a big part of making sure that we have 100% clean energy in Washington State by 2045, and was a strong supporter. I wasn't in office when it passed, of the Climate Commitment Act, which puts our state on a path to be carbon neutral by 2050. So there's a lot of things that we need to do between now and then to make sure that we have a planet that's sustainable for our kids. And I look forward to being in the legislature working on those issues. And I also just want to be sure that, going back to your question around equity, making sure that equity is front and center in the policies that we're creating around climate change and how we solve this issue. We want to make sure that overburdened communities and lower income communities, BIPOC communities, can take advantage of all the opportunities that are out there right now to make their own homes healthier by maybe converting from a natural gas furnace to a electric furnace, and making sure that as we transition away from gas in our built environment, that low income people and overburdened communities have access to those subsidies and outright outright grants to really make their homes a healthier place to live. So looking forward to continuing working on the legislature, and I would sure appreciate your vote by November 8th, and would just be absolutely honored to represent you and work with all of those folks at the city council level. Steve and I have worked together a ton on various proposals, and I look forward to doing that again. So thanks so much for being here and for hanging in.
Thank you. And I did forget to mention you get 3 minutes for this. And then we'll go to Mr. Menser.
Thank you. Thank you. I don't think I'll need 3 minutes. A couple of things I want to say though. My commitment to diversity and equity in Thurston County is absolute. When the county passed the twin crisis declarations, resolutions, crisis for institutional racism, I was hauled on to a major Seattle conservative talk radio show by a guy named John Carlson, who I didn't even know. And I was ridiculed in front of a massive Seattle radio audience for those steps. And you know what? I don't care. I stood my ground and it didn't bother me because I know that I'm right and he's wrong. This is critical to who we are as in Thurston County and what we're about. And so I wanted to say that. I also wanted to say that, I question why my opponent did not make it a priority to be here today. And collaboration and inclusivity in governance is key to who I'm about and why I've received so many endorsements in this reelection campaign. My of the 22 members of the Lacey, Olympia, and Tumwater City Councils. It includes all of our state legislators. It includes all of our port commissioners. It includes all of our Olympia, 3 of the 4 South County mayors that I worked with. It includes all three major firefighters unions, the teachers unions, the healthcare workers unions, the state employees, the Teamsters, you name it. And it's because I worked hard for 4 years to work collaboratively across this county. And inclusivity is just from top to bottom is how I govern and what I'm about. And I think it's who we're about as Thurston County residents. So appreciate your vote by November 8th. Thank you, Beth. That was a good way to phrase it. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Ms. Bateman.
Thank you so much. You know, I think one of the things I would mention is my passion for health. And I believe that we should all have access to affordable and accessible healthcare in Washington State. We are on track. We have mission that's back to the legislature on how we can implement a universal healthcare system. It's going to take us time, but it's been vetted and it's a good come to the table and actually make that come to fruition. I'm also really passionate about caregivers. So we've got a lot of long-term care workers that are not making living wages in Washington State. And we need to raise up those workers and ensure that they're getting living wages because we need a sustainable workforce for our state. These folks. So I'm really glad we increased those wages and we have. I also believe strongly in tax fairness. Tax fairness is connected to our ability to have a robust social safety net in Washington State. And as Ty mentioned earlier, we have the most regressive state in the country in terms of how we tax people. That directly impacts our ability to have supports for people in Washington. Representative, and I hope to have the opportunity to continue that work so I can continue fighting for working families, seniors, and our most vulnerable. If you want to contact me, you can reach me at my website, which is votejessicabateman.com. I have an email address and a phone number if you want to talk through any issues that weren't discussed today. I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Mr. Snaza.
Thank you. So just to address a couple of things is that I want to be very clear that I believe that we all have in our own personal lives have suffered social and economic crisis in our lives, yet alone with my brother and I both being homeless. But I don't bring it up. I don't talk about it because I'm a survivor of it and it doesn't affect who I am today. But it's something that I don't need to bring up. But one thing I do want to bring up is this forum and how awesome. Rob, you had mentioned that this is the third year that you've done this forum and we've done it in Zoom. But this is the first time I've gotten to address the LGBTQ community. And what I'm asking in my position as sheriff is how address the concerns of the LGBTQ community to help better serve you. And that's what I believe that this should be about for me as the sheriff, is how do we better serve the LGBTQ community? And what are the crises that we're dealing with, whether it healthcare, whether it is harassment. Those are the things that I want to be able to better serve the community because Thurston County is all of our home. It's where we live. And this is my job, is to serve every one of you. And I'm very proud to be able to do that. And I want to continue doing it for the next 4 years. And I'd really be honored to have all of your vote on November 8th. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Drew.
Thank you. Well, heck, as assessor, and my choice to run for office was driven by a desire to lead a team and to transform an office and to improve customer service and restore integrity and confidence in what is also a regressive tax system in our state. But the integrity of that system of measuring value for the segregation of tax liability between all of the taxpayers in each district is about creating confidence for the fire departments and the school districts and all of the tax districts that serve our needs. So I've loved serving as the assessor, and I ask for your support for another term for that. Apart from this career, when I think about the projects that I've been involved in that have given me the most passive joy, it has been working with youth in community projects and building a civic sense. So working with high school and middle school kids through Kiwanis and Key Club in Issaquah, and then working with youth here in Thurston County under Gregoire to transform the raised beds on the Capitol campus to produce produce for the food bank. It's those projects and the time spent building Pizza Klatch to a much larger, more successful organization that are the most rewarding. And maybe you already knew that from listening to me. It is the community service aspect is the most rewarding. And it's my honor to serve the people of Thurston County. But honestly, it's an honor to serve people in my community that are less fortunate than I might be. So I think I'll see the rest of my time. You guys have devoted so much time to this valuable forum, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mr. Sanders.
Yeah, thank you. One thing I'll talk about is that recently it's come up that I'm the woke candidate for sheriff. That's my new bag. You know what? Like if being the woke sheriff is how I have to be labeled to get the point across. When you look at the endorsements between the two candidates here, right? Both John and I are running as independents, and I truly feel like I'm an independent. There are things on both sides of the political spectrum that I try to pull from and package forward to serve the people. But it's not a secret, right? I'm endorsed by Thurston County Democrats. John is endorsed by Thurston County Republicans. And so there obviously are some political differences, and there are people that are choosing sides, and there are people that are looking to make changes. And so regardless of that, my big thing is that if I'm going to be labeled the woke sheriff because I want to have the most diverse administration that the county has ever seen, including people of color and females, so be it. I guess that makes me the woke sheriff candidate. If I want to deputies who commit crimes accountable and not let them just resign in lieu of termination with no charges sent to the prosecutor's office, there are no rules for that stuff. That is not true. There's no rule that prevents the sheriff from having an independent investigation done by a different agency, even if the employee wants to quit or whatever. The criminal charge is irrelevant from the police union. And I know our union doesn't appreciate being used as a scapegoat for that, to try and say that our union is covering up for bad police officers. That is a decision made by the sheriff as to whether or not he's going to have another agency. So as sheriff, I will be holding those deputies accountable. When they commit crimes, they're not just going to get to go bunny hop to the next department. They are going to have a criminal record behind them if I'm the sheriff, because that accountability and that transparency is important to me. And so if all of those things make me the woke sheriff, I'll be the woke sheriff who runs for Thurston County Sheriff's Office. And again, I think people have a very clear distinction when it comes to voting. John has been in this position for 12 years, and I tell everyone the exact same thing. John is a great guy. I was a huge supporter of his. He hired me. He swore me in. Well, actually, he didn't swear me in because of the motorcycle accident. But I ultimately met with him, and again, up until a few years ago, it's time. It's time. You get to a point where it's like you've been in there for 12 years, and what I'm asking for is a vote for me, is a vote for change, a vote to push this county and its law enforcement branch forward into the future. And a lot of talk about is my age. I'll be the youngest sheriff in the state. And when you talk about things like progressing the rights of employees and progressing the rights of the LGBT community, I think what we're really looking for is a youthful, energetic candidate who's willing to intentionally listen. So please vote for change come November 8th.
All right, thank you. And thank you all for coming. We will have a candidates forum next year. All are welcome. And if you want to come to the PFLAG meeting, we are meeting tomorrow at the United Methodist Church on Legion Way at, what time was it? 2?
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock. Thank you, Larry. And with that, we have ended. Let me stop the recording.